is such a special place. You can be from anywhere in the world and you'll be welcomed with open arms.
Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Breaking Bread, the food podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the most interesting, exciting food scene in the UK. So we're your hosts. I'm Liam. Beside me as always, Carl.
Hello.
So on today's episode, we are going deep into whiskey, man. I know this is a subject that you love.
Mad for whiskey.
It's funny, you suggested this episode just after I'd come back from Ireland and I'd done a whiskey tour. And
It was weird timing, wasn't it?
Mate, I actually know a little bit about whiskey, so even though I don't drink it, I'm really excited to come and do this because I think it's such a fascinating subject. And it can be daunting, can't it? Like whiskey, it feels like such
a big area, especially when you scratch the surface and you're like, shit, even books and you can go to college courses and it's so wide and varied.
So you're like, how do you even start with all of that? So today's episode is all about uncomplicating all of that by talking to a certified expert.
You can't get any better at whiskey than Amy.
Amy from Grain and Glass, tasting rooms, bar, just a cool place. If you love whiskey, that's the place.
Yeah. It's fantastic. The incredible selection of whiskey. They do flight boards, personal. The tastings sell out. So if you want to do a tasting session, go and book one. And it always ends up great value for money as well. You get loads of fantastic whiskies, some of which, like, if you just ordered one at a bar, would cost what the tasting session costs, and you get 5 of them.
Yeah. It's a story as well. Having someone who's knowledgeable about it, they can tell you a little bit about the history, the culture.
Yeah. Oh, if you completely, you can go in, just ask. If you're unsure about anything, I know a bit about whiskey and ice when I've been in there since. I've just asked what's good, and they ask you what you like, and they'll suggest one for you.
That's what you want. That's what you want, especially with whiskey. It's so confusing sometimes. So stay tuned to elevate your knowledge of one of the most fascinating drinks you can get, really. There's not many stories like whiskey. But before that, we need to thank our brilliant sponsors who we are just massively grateful for. This season has massively been improved by their support. I mean, their support always, to be honest. Our first ever sponsor, Birmingham Rum, their support over the years has always meant so much to us. So we always jumped at the chance then when they asked if they could sponsor the podcast.
They've always messaged us, always asked when there's new episodes. They've always been there for us, haven't they?
Just fantastic people, local as well, locally made craft rum, award-winning, brilliant people, brilliant story. Go back to our episode. The episode that got this whole season started was a good chat with Harry. Go find out more about that rum, all the different rums they do, the cocktails you can make with them. You done a tasting, man. I forget about the taste. It feels like a long time ago.
I haven't forgot about the tasting. It's great.
That was brilliant, that tasting.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're a local bar or restaurant to the Midlands, you want to be stocking these brilliant locally made rums. And if you do, head to our show notes and links can be found there. Our second sponsor, Easy Food. Everyone knows about Easy Food now. They've been seriously onboarding restaurants and food takeaway businesses left, right and centre because they're on a mission to save all you brilliant businesses money and all the hard work that you owners put in. They want to make sure you're keeping more of your own money by not taking a ridiculous percentage that some of the other big apps do. It's not just that they're charging a flat fee, £1.50 per order, as opposed to the usual 30-40%. It's just the ongoing support you get as well. You know, Harm's a great friend of ours. Been on the podcast now twice. Really great guy. Really passionate about business owners being able to not just survive, but thrive. That's what he's brought into Easy Food.
Yeah.
And he's on board there now. And if you've got any queries, if you're a West Midlands food business, he's going to be your rep. He's on the end of the phone. You don't get that with any of the others. I know you don't.
Well, they haven't just created an app and then sold it to restaurants. They've created an app with restaurants and with hospitality to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. So it's just brilliant. So if you'd like to sign up for that, obviously the links are in our show notes as always. If this is a drinking game, I wonder how many you could do a drinking game with podcasts, couldn't you? Like every time someone says links in show notes,
Just no one can say links to me anymore. It's in my head. I just
links in show notes.
it's just the word links now. Whenever I hear it,
Cool. So thanks to our sponsors. How you been, dude?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yes, very good, very good.
So, where you been eating, mate?
Where have I been eating? That's a good. Oh, where again? We eat together a lot.
Yeah,
We went on a road trip.
surprisingly.
It's not strictly Birmingham, this, but don't hate me.
But they've done stuff in Birmingham, so we can go
They
with
started
it.
off in Digbeth Dining. So yeah, Dick's Smokehouse, mate.
Yeah.
Bromsgrove.
So good.
The ribs alone and the barbecue sauce are well worth that half an hour journey from Birmingham. It's fantastic. The sauce was that good. I took a bottle home with me.
Yeah, they sell it, don't they?
Yeah, it was. Oh, mate, them ribs. We both got platters, didn't we? We took Jim Weston.
Jim Weston.
It's like the fifth Beatle, the secret third member of Breaking Bread.
Yeah,
Jim
yeah.
Weston. Love that guy.
Yeah, you two shared a platter, and they had a special single platter on, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was
Worked out
great.
perfect for three of us.
Yeah.
I mean, there was too much food on that platter for the two of us. So, like, it was just
I think I took a
ridiculous.
load home.
Yeah.
It was that much food.
Yeah. I think the ribs were the star. The mac and cheese was fantastic. But even the brioches with the pulled
everything.
pork and the Dick Smokehouse. We need to go back there, you know.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
You've been anywhere interesting, anywhere different?
So yeah, Porto Douro. You remember Acock's Green?
Yeah.
Portuguese
I know it's Tom
restaurant.
Cullen and
Had a good few mentions
a
off.
few others
few
talking about
people,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I never got there myself.
They closed the AG one and set one up in Solihull. Bigger, much larger venue. Looks really nice inside.
I looked
went
at the
there.
menu. The menu looks fantastic. Like 20 odd quid for a steak. Who's selling steak for less than 30 quid these days?
Very good value for money. Massive portions. Food's beautiful. I had a great time there.
What did you have?
So I had the sausage starter. It comes out in like a little pig, like a terracotta pig, and it's like flaming. You get two sausages and a massive loaf of bread basically to eat with.
Yeah, that looked big.
Well, I'll put it this way: my daughter ate more of it than I did because she was like, "What's that? Can I try it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "You know what? Kids like,
Yeah.
Go on, have it." And I had the special for the main, which is like a deep fried 3 or 4 meat sandwich that's covered in melted cheese, tomato
I've
sauce.
seen that on the menu, you know.
You know, it's not the type of thing I would normally order at all, but it was under their specials, and it's like, right, I don't really know what to have anyway, so I'll get that. And I don't regret it at all. It was fantastic.
The menu is that good. I was looking through it and I was like, there's like 5 or 6 things that I'd really want on the menu. I was like, I'd want that.
That's why I
Definitely
picked the
want that.
special, because I was like, well, I can't pick, so I'll just, they've put it as the number one special. I'll have that. And my wife had the salmon, 2 giant pieces of salmon
The
veg
salmon looked great.
spuds.
Yeah.
Mother-in-law had the lamb shank. That was
was
massive.
jealous of that.
Yeah, I was,
I
to be
was
honest,
so
when that
jealous
turned
of
up, that turned up before my sandwich, and I was looking at it going, "Oh man, that looks good."
It's when I get to work and people are like, did you have that lamb shoulder? And I have to like angrily say, no, it was Carl. Because we shared an Instagram.
But we took the little one, and they really look after the kids there as well.
Oh,
Like,
that's nice.
put a lot of effort into her, and there's a kids menu and all that type of stuff. It's great. And then at the end, they come round, they give you a shot of port and one of them pastels, the little
Oh, I
custard
love
tarts.
them things.
So nice.
Yeah, you
They
can-
did,
you
if you don't
can
want it
keep
there
the-
and then,
you
they
can keep
box
the
it up for you
pork.
so you can take it away as well.
Yeah. Oh,
Which who's doing that at restaurants now? Giving
Nah,
away stuff. It
them
doesn't
guys
happen
are
anymore,
gone.
does it?
yeah.
But yeah, it's brilliant. I'll be going again.
Yeah, I definitely need to go there. If you've never been, definitely recommend that.
Yeah, it's up there.
It's nice supporting these little like family-run businesses that just appear out of nowhere.
Yeah.
No hype, no like social media stuff.
They did no press whatsoever. You'd be
No.
hard pushed to know that
No.
opened.
Brilliant. I love that.
Mm.
So back to today's episode, obviously everything whiskey. Just a celebration of this unbelievable drink.
Yeah, I was in my element for this one. I really was.
Mm.
'Cause I can, as much as loving drinking whiskey, I can listen to people talk about it for ages as well. I find it fascinating.
There's not a spirit that is more fascinating
No.
from every aspect, you know, like the stories of the culture. We even spoke a little while afterwards about Ireland's whiskey scene and how it's changed and the things that's starting up there. England, obviously,
Some great English whiskies out there.
it's emerging now.
There's a whole festival that comes to Birmingham every year.
everyone jumps on Scotch, don't they, straight away? Some people think of the Irish whiskey, but Scotch is the big one. But England's doing some good stuff now at the minute. We've got some couple of good ones in Birmingham.
Yeah, Birmingham alone's got its own kicking off soon.
But even in like an investment, like financial perspective, it's fascinating for that as well. There's an opportunity to make money if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, we do go into that. It does seem like that area is sort of dying a bit now.
It does, yeah. And obviously we're not
But I mean, it's one of them areas.
none of us are financial advisors either, so we're not like pushing to give that kind of advice.
Yeah, don't take financial advice from us.
We're just a food podcast. Carl's more likely to drink it than he is to save it anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So I hope you love this episode. Hope you get loads from it. We both did. I certainly did. If you do love it, please like, share, review the podcast. Get that positive Birmingham message out there as far and as wide as you can. We just really would appreciate it. Without you, this doesn't happen.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, word of mouth has got us this far, and we really appreciate every one of you. So hope you all enjoy Wine and Glass Whiskey. Amy, welcome to Breaking Bread. How's things?
Good, thank you.
Cool. Thanks for inviting us down to this place. It's stunning.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Yeah, Wine and
it's a
Glass.
great place.
Yes.
I mean, the Jury Quarter is a pretty place anyway. So
Yeah.
you'd struggle to get a bad spot here, really, wouldn't you? But you've kind of hit the jackpot, really.
I think we have, yeah. I think, so this is, for those who haven't been here, this is a Grade 2 listed old jewellery factory, but we're actually on the site of the Museum of the Jewellery Quarter. So this used to be just there, a space that they would use for events and conferences or whatever, and polling. So anyone who used to live in the Jewellery Quarter, or who does live in the Jewellery Quarter, would come here and vote. So when we first opened, we did get a few strays coming in
With their poll card.
with their poll cards, looking a bit, and they're some of our best members now. So
You should have asked them, are you voting Tory? Because if so, this bin here is the ballot box.
Yeah.
No, it's do you know what? Embarrassingly, seeing as we champion Birmingham all the time, I didn't know there was a Jury Quarter museum.
Oh, no.
well,
Did you?
it
I knew there
has.
was a museum I hadn't been to. Well, it hasn't been open, has it? For
Yeah,
a
I've
It's
while?
not been
Past
open
here
for quite a while.
loads of
It's well worth
Yeah.
coming back. So they hopefully will open, not reopen, I should say, because they've been sort of open very sporadically after COVID, sadly. So, but yeah, so we occasionally get people who A, think they should be voting in here, and B, who want to do a Jewellery Quarter museum tour with us. So we just get them drunk on whiskey and send them on their way. So
Because I hear about the
It's a way better way of doing it.
Hear about the coffin wax all the time. But not
yeah,
so
I
much,
I think it's just because they've been closed, but it's a really good tour. It's a really, really fascinating place. It was so it was the Smith and Pepper factory, and it was a company that they just downed tools in the 80s, I think, and literally just the company went bust and they just left. So if you do, when you come back and do your tours, you'll be able to walk into a very traditional workshop, which had just been left with all the equipment, and you can just go and have a look at how they would very traditionally make jewellery in the area.
It's a big part of Birmingham, isn't it? You know, city of 1,000 trades and all that.
Well, yeah. Well, people forget the Jewellery Quarter. When people say it now, they're like, "Oh, that's a good area to go out. You've got this bar, this bar,
Yeah.
this bar, this restaurant." You forget, no, they still make jewellery.
Yeah,
It's
they
a
still make
place.
jewellery,
It's
yes.
still a good place.
Yeah.
I came to get my wife's engagement ring.
Oh,
here.
nice.
Yeah, I did as well,
didn't
Yeah, we actually get a lot of. We've got some lovely neighbours over the way. Actually, a company called James Newman who make sounds like a shameless plug, but maybe it is. Who makes some absolutely beautiful pieces. We're hopefully good neighbours to each other. So they will send. It's actually lovely. They'll go and people come and get their rings refitted or bespoke jewellery made, or and they'll send them over here for half an hour and to have drinks while they kind of put the finishing touches and put the sizing together. So yeah, it works really well. And then we give them beer and other things when they take our post in. So trying to be good neighbours.
So we'll get back to this place and the Jewellery Quarter. When we do the podcast, we like to take people all the way back, really get to know you. So are you from round Birmingham or?
Do I sound like I'm from around Birmingham?
Oh, it's hard to say nowadays, isn't it? Like,
No, I'm not.
No.
So that probably came out worse
the
than it was intended.
I think a lot of this series is people not from Birmingham. Who are
Yeah,
in Birmingham now.
that's
It's
true.
the way it's going.
I would count myself as a Brummie. I think the accent definitely comes out. Like a lot of my family is South. And when I go and see them, they're like, they sort of comment quite a lot now on how Brummie I sound, which I'm very happy to do so. I hail from quite a few places, but I ended up so mainly South London, Devon, Leamington, and I ended up here when I was commuting in from Leamington and working at the ICC in the city centre. So I always wanted to be in events, and I had my eye on the NEC group, ICC. So I worked there for quite a while. I left because I wanted to do different things, so I wanted to get more into kind of organising of big events. Which is something I don't talk about very much. I was actually very ill for quite a while, and I changed my job, and then I fell quite ill, and yes, it was actually touch and go whether I was actually going to walk again. So never admitted that one. It was a very difficult time, and I'd left a job, so I didn't really have anything. So I had to leave Birmingham for a bit and go and stay with my parents, and recuperate from just actually a very terrible back issue that happened to me. So I think when something like that happens, you become quite. I know what it's like to be for awful things to happen and to know how bad life can get, and I think you become a bit more. What's the word? Laissez-faire, let's say, with kind of important decisions. Things become less difficult. I think you can take risks. I think you become a bit more risk averse. So I actually I went for a job at a big law firm, worked in marketing, did that for a while, and then decided also that I wanted to leave without anything to go to. And I just had this kind of vague idea, and I believe me when I say it was vague, just sort of rattling around in my head. And having met lots of entrepreneurs down the way, I think it starts just like a little trickle of thought in your brain, and then it just doesn't ever leave, and then you have to kind of act on it. So I was sitting at my desk at this big law firm on Cromwell Row with my nice salary, and being able to actually go out and do things. But actually looking around the city, having lived in Birmingham for quite a while at that point, thinking that there wasn't a huge amount to do sort of in the food scene. So this is going back to kind of 2011. And lots of big things hadn't started at that point. So it was very genuinely coming from a place of, I want to go out, well, actually probably it was quite selfishly, actually, I wanted to go out and do more stuff. And the stuff that I wanted to do didn't exist. So I thought, all right, then I'll start it. So the first iteration of this was a company called the Food and Drink Events Company. And it was all about using my operational events knowledge to work with experts in and around Birmingham, will bring people in and showcase their knowledge, their products, whatever it was. So it literally was a company that organised food and drink events. And I specialised in English wine, which was really interesting. And I worked with other people around the city. I worked with Tom from I Choose for a bit, and we did a few events together. And it was a time when there were lots of people just sort of starting to circulate and just do a few little bits and bobs. And it kind of went from there, and whiskey was part of it. And I actually walked into the shop in the city centre and just basically told the person in there that they were going to work with me. And he just went, oh, okay. We'd never met before. And we started doing events. We would collectively bring brands into the city, and whiskey brands were very good at telling us that we were a third tier city, and they were circumventing us at that time. Obviously, London was still the city that everybody wanted to do stuff in. And then they would sort of, recite the list of Manchester, Bristol, Leeds, and then Birmingham would come in a healthy third, let's say, or an unhealthy third. And it was a real fight, because people were kind of curious. They're like, oh, it's really great you're doing stuff. We haven't really done anything in Birmingham before, because we would normally go to the regional cities that we go to. And then they would, say, oh, we could, we do this in Bristol, blah, blah, blah. It became more than just organising tastings. It was like, right, this is about putting Birmingham on the map. And it hadn't really started like that. It had started because I wanted just to do cool stuff. and that's very genuinely where it all came from. But it was the whiskey stuff that people were most interested in. And I mean, still to this day, people yell at me across the street, whiskey, oi, whiskey woman. But they used to do that. And I think it just for some reason, whiskey it was the right time, and it was growing, and it just captured people's imagination. But then what was lovely was I was getting people from looking at what we were doing from Manchester, for example, and going, oh, Manchester doesn't have anything like this. Or, I'd hear people in Bristol, they were like, oh, we've looked at what you've done, and we're actually going to start a thing. And it became kind of, a really nice thing. So in my small pocket of Birmingham, looking at whiskey, we became something that most of the cities, even in London, didn't have. And we were popping up at lots of different places. So I'd already mentioned the Plough to you guys, the Wellington, started at the old Joint Stock, Hotel du Vin. So there were loads of places that we did stuff. And I started Whiskey Birmingham, which is the first whiskey festival that the city had. And that kind of started doing well. And each year we would grow, and we were at the Bond. So we were one of the first drink festivals to go into the Bond. I think it was the time. And then, other things had kind of started, like dining and lots of beer events and stuff like that. So it was kind of, I think it was, if I'd done it 5 years later or two or 3 years later, maybe it wouldn't have worked, or somebody else would have come in and done it. But I think it was the right time and the right interest. During that time, I was still doing a few bits and bobs. I was still doing a bit of freelancing as well, because sadly, doing the, whiskey tastings on a month doesn't quite pay all the bills. But we were getting loads of private events. The festival was doing really, really well. And I'd been able to, so after a little while, hire my first member of staff. So that was great. And then we'd go to these other bars, and I'd bring in, 30 odd people, and they'd all go to the bar and buy a drink. And they do that loads. And I was like, that should be, I'm bringing these people in. And I was like, right, if I'm going to have a serious company, I need a space of my own. And I think it was sort of 2016 that I thought, right, I need to start looking. So the thing that I normally do is just go straight into something and not really think too much about the consequences or, what could go wrong. And I think most people who start businesses probably don't. I think if you really, really sit and think about all the things that go wrong, no one would ever build a business. I really wanted the city centre. There were a couple of places that I was looking at that didn't work out for varying reasons. And then I was with my very good friend, Alex Nicholson-Evans, and we were just having a very casual lunch. And at the end, she just went, "Oh, still looking?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, actually." And then she mentioned this space, and I come to look at it, and I was just, it was just the kind of the right conditions, the right kind of space. I didn't want the Jewellery Quarter at all. I wanted city centre. But now, because I think there are more businesses that are similar to mine in the Jewellery Quarter than there are in the city centre.
Yeah. So
we do, I'm well aware we do miss out on traffic, I think, of, being near the city centre, but we've been able to put a really lovely room and tasting room together and bar together.
And the Jewellery Quarter is a destination spot.
Yeah,
as well,
definitely. And it's near the train station as well. So I didn't think that would be important. I think it's the Jewellery Quarter exists, I think, on traffic that comes in from the tram and then train. We get so many people over from places like Stourbridge and Kidderminster and other places in that direction. Or just generally, actually, we have tons of people coming in from all over the UK now. I think we actually had somebody come down from Scotland to learn about how to taste whiskey, which I thought was...
Wow.
I know, probably should put that a quote on my website. But
yeah, we had someone from Scotland.
I mean, maybe they were in the area anyway, but, I'd like to think that they just came here to learn about whiskey because there was nobody up in Scotland that could teach them, so...
Wow. That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it's been a long old journey with, quite a few bumps in the way, but obviously the biggest bump being in March 2020. So we've technically been open 6.5 years here. So it took quite a while because this is a grade 2 listed building. So that for those who have had any work with grade 2 listed buildings know that they're incredibly difficult, obviously, rightly so. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think when you're a business owner, you just want to get things done. You want to sign the papers and, someone to give you the keys within a week. And obviously that doesn't really work. So we had to there was a lot of hoops to jump through. And, to protect this building, and for those who have been here, you'll know what a stunning building it is. But it would go down to things like, the paint type of paint and just, the shelves we were putting up, the doors, everything had to be, signed off in triplicate kind of thing. It took a while to get through, but I remember receiving the go ahead. I think it was the 1st of January or 2nd of January. So Alex, I think at that time, was living in the Jewellery Quarter, and we met up at 1,000 Trades, and we just sat there like giggling because she was still working at the museum at that point, or the museum's trust rather, and she had the contract in her hands, and we had this like little celebratory drink. The place was dead, and it was just me and Alex just sat there like going. So it's an unusual partnership. So obviously a very kind of corporate style business, licensing a space off a trust. And I think it's quite unusual in the whole country, actually. So having a specialist bar on the site of a museum is something that they obviously had to think very, very carefully about. So we got the keys. I think we did the build in 3 weeks. So the people who were doing my bill, they were looking at me like I was a crazy person because I wanted to open for Burns Night, which is on the 25th of January. So they were like, "Are you sure you want to try and get the bill through?" Yeah, it's like, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we do. And then January as well, which is, quite a hard time to get people to do stuff. We managed to do most of it in the 3 weeks and we're able to open on the 25th. And we opened by having a bagpiper stood out because people were like, "What? Why are you going down that road?" No one knew where we were. So we'd say, "Well, we're Vice Street," and no one had a clue where we meant. So we thought, well, how on earth are we going to get people to the bar for opening night? Bagpiper. So, and people to this day still remember this, like these slightly strange notes wafting around the Jewellery Quarter on Burns Night.
That noise travels as well, doesn't it?
And they were like, people were kind of getting their maps out, and they were like, "Bagpiper, right? Know exactly where we're going." So yeah, it was great. I remember, people, we're still painting, an hour before opening the doors and stuff. It feels like only a week ago, but that was 6.5 years ago.
Wow.
Did you have any help? Like, it's one thing thinking I'm going to open a bar, but to actually go ahead and do it, that's a massive task to take on, especially if you've never worked as a manager or ran bars or anything like that.
So I worked in hospitality years ago, but I mean years ago, the kind of, the university rite of passage of working in a goth club in Hull, actually.
That sounds fantastic.
Do you know what? I maintain to this day, before this bar was probably the best job I ever had. It was absolutely brilliant. So it was a club called Spiders in Hull. And if anyone knows that, you'll know what I mean by how fantastic it was. They wouldn't let townies in. So if they got big groups of lads showing up just wearing, in shirts and stuff, they wouldn't let them in.
Brilliant.
And there was never any trouble. I mean, it was a real life lesson, actually. It was a brilliant place. People would come in and they had piercings everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And they'd be wearing, huge heels, leather everywhere. They'd have it. There was a craze at the time for animal contact lenses.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
People coming in like wearing...
This was us. This is our teenage.
We didn't go as far as Hull, but definitely did a few of that.
Yeah, it was that. And people come in on their own, and it was the safest place ever. And they would play proper kind of moshing rock music, and people would, if a song came on that they liked, and at the time it was Marilyn Manson, so pre-allegation Marilyn Manson, and people would just drop their drinks on the floor rather than try and find somewhere to put it. They would just drop it and go and run to the dance floor. But it was fantastic because there was no trouble. Everyone was it was quite studenty, but everyone was just lovely. And they had 2 glass collectors that everyone thought was married, and they were both about 80. And if you ever want to not ever have any trouble in a place, get a glass collector who looks like your grandmother, and no one bothered them, and everyone would just. It was like the parting of the seas, Peggy, I think her name was, she would walk through and, everyone would hold everybody else back so she wouldn't fall over or trip or be, roughed up by anyone's elbows, and let her get all the glasses. And it was lovely.
There is a misconception, I think, especially with music like that. Music we listen to, it's our type.
Yeah.
That it's quite violent. The music itself is an aggressive. Yeah, but that's fine. But I think that takes it out of the people that are there, if you know what I mean. And they end up being... It's just
an alternative scene, but I think the owners, that's what they knew. It was only open 2 days. It was only open Friday, Saturday till I think it was 2 a.m. or something. But people were just lovely, and it was my first. So I was a student there, and it was my first experience of people going to places on their own, which is important, and I'll come back onto that. The bar wouldn't open until 9, and we were serving such delightful things as Pangalactic Gargle Blasters, which would be a pint. I mean, I don't think you'd be able to serve them these days. A pint of about 6 shots of not just, varying elements of alcohol in a pint glass that was basically Dayglow blue.
Oh my.
And shots were 25p or something awful, or 50p with cola. Yeah,
this Subway was like 150 for a Jack and Coke.
It was snobs on a Wednesday, 50p a shot.
This is Yorkshire, so it was cheaper.
Yeah,
but it was just an amazing place. And the point, I think it really, I was just a Midlands girl from Leamington Spa, had no clue about it. But it was these people, these folk who just, they looked like you wouldn't want to. It sounds awful, but you wouldn't want to pass them on the street. But they were it was such a brilliant lesson in life that it doesn't matter how many piercings you've got around your cheeks, lips, forehead, nose, etc. they were just absolutely delightful, and they'd always come, oh, how you doing? You okay? Have you had a good week? How's things going? And they were just lovely, really lovely people. Obviously, there were people who, could be a bit of trouble, but they were normally the students. It was all the locals who were just absolutely delightful. And the lesson was that you could go somewhere like this on your own, and it wasn't about necessarily meeting people. You could just go and exist there, and because you like the music. And maybe that has obviously struck a chord over the years, because one of the things that I wanted with this space, if you look at the bar, so obviously that's meant to look like a cask. The most important thing was to have this bar, this community bar. So, and we get loads of people now who just come in on their own. And some people, they want to chat. They want to just talk to us. They might know me. They might know one of my team, or they might want to come and read a book and not be bothered. But the whole point of it, really, the whole point of the club, the community here is so anyone can come in on their own. And I think there should be, I think the independent scene in Birmingham is really good at recognising that. So you can go to other places like Couch, like Passing, Fox and Chance, etc. And you can sit at the bar. And it's like you can go and do these things that you love. You might not have someone to do them with, but you can go and you can create a whole new friendship group based on, well, for this, it's like your love of pure whiskey.
Yeah.
So, but that's the kind of ethos. So when we talk about building a business and values and such, for us, it always comes down to community values. Like, how do we treat people? And I kind of reflect on it a lot, because I think you always have to go back to your why. I kind of buy into those, entrepreneurial statements.
Simon Sinek. Yeah.
But it's such a simple thing, but
good.
it's very meaningful. And I think there's just something that this is, I want people to come in here, and it's like coming into my sitting room, and it's like, how do you treat them? Do they want a cup of tea kind of thing? Probably haven't got any slippers for them. Technically, we've had a lot of people who have become really good friends, genuine friends, people that I see outside of the bar. And I think it's massively changed my life from working in corporate marketing to doing this.
But do you think that kind of comes back to your experience in events? Because events obviously are quite literally creating experiences for people. So.
Yeah, definitely. So it always started with events, and that was all about getting people together to experience the love of whiskey. And then I realised over time that whiskey specifically draws in a certain crowd, and they're people, I'm going to say it, they're all geeks. I'm sure they'll all agree with me as well. But it's people who are curious. They want to know how things are put together. Lots of engineers and IT professionals. That's my regulars, actually. So they like the idea of whiskey, because you have to kind of understand, you have to be able to put it apart to really understand it. And whiskey, even though it's a very simple drink made of 3 ingredients, it's how those ingredients are dealt with. And there are so many other factors. And I think that brings in people who...
I was going to say, what is it about whiskey that's so specific? It's just this whole area by itself. Is it just the volume and the amount there is, or how varied it is?
Right. How long have you got? I think there is a curiosity. So I think if you have a bit of a curious mind, whiskey really plays to that. The fact that it is made simply of water, yeast and grain. And then it's all the other things that happen. It's the type of cask, the type of wood, what's the cask has been used for before. It's the environment in which it's matured in. It's the type of warehouse that it's, or structure that it's matured in. It's how long it's been aged for. There are so many factors or variables that influence whiskies. How long you're fermenting for example. How big your stills are. Like all of these things, if you pull apart the process, you change one element, you change one variable, you've got an entirely different whiskey. So it's almost that the distillery can use so many of these things, so that there are so many expressions out on the market. They've changed one of the variables. They dry their barley with peat, for example. It's another variable. And then peat in itself is a variable. Peat isn't just one thing. There are lots of different different types of peat.
There's no way every 2 peat can be the same, because it's come from a different field or a different area.
And then the whole, I'm going to mention if you're a whiskey fan, the word terroir is causing a bit of arguments actually. So the idea that you can have terroir in whiskey is not as common as understanding terroir. It means of a place. It's like how so wine is a better example. So it's to do with how the earth, the kind of earth is the earth. What's the soil like? Yeah. Is the soil near water? Is the soil, is it clay, more clay within the soil, and that will massively affect how your vines grow. Terroir in whiskey means people are trying to sort of say, right, where if your barley is grown in an organic way, if your barley is grown in a forest, near a forest, or if your barley is grown near the sea, if your barley, the soil conditions are different, if you're using like non-aggressive farming methods, that's going to impact the whiskey. The naysayers would say, well, it doesn't matter because you're chucking it all in a still and boiling it. So that's quite an aggressive part of the whiskey making process. You're sort of stripping it back almost. I think because there are so many whiskies, people are trying to find new bits, new elements to talk about. So you have all of these exotic casks, I would say. So I think somebody just put something out with a really specific oak. It's like Colombian oak or something random. But people are suddenly like, oh, that's a new one, not heard of that one. And oak, there are about 600 species of oak around the world. So we, in whiskey, will predominantly use American oak, European oak, but even then you can have there are so many different types of oak under the banner of American oak or European oak. So people were using, I think, like Hungarian oak, for example, but there are so many different oak types. So in the whiskey world now, because we're reaching a point where there's a lot of whiskey on the market, and I think quite a lot of distilleries who are new, there's a lot of new distilleries over the last year. So in most countries, it's you're maturing your whiskey for 3 years. And then so you don't have a product for 3 years. So you'll do things like make gin, you'll sell your casks for investment, and you'll do distillery tours. There's other bits and bobs you can do, but those are the main ones. And so they kind of have to release. So the majority of young distilleries will release at 3 or thereabouts. And their first releases do really, really well. And then the second releases come on and they're not doing as well. So I think everyone's starting to be a bit worried, and there are still loads of distilleries being built. There's been a few have stopped, or they've put their plans in and then have just kind of left it. But there are still a number of distilleries, and I'm thinking mainly Scotland. Scotland will have up to, I think, 152 distilleries quite soon, I think, 150, 152, which doesn't sound loads, but if you're thinking about how much they're producing. So there is a bit of a concern in the whiskey world. From a consumer perspective, it's very different. People are still finding whiskey and getting interested in whiskey. The idea of whiskey having to be drunk neat is kind of going, because the brands are like, we want you to drink our whiskey, so do whatever you want with it. Chuck it in, put loads of water in, put loads of Coke in. It doesn't, they want their whiskey to be
down someone's neck.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll get, and I think more the older generation, let's say, have been advertised to, and I do believe it's about marketing more than anything. And they were told that single malts are good, blends are bad, don't add water with your whiskey, you have to drink it. You're allowed 1 drop, if anything, of water and that, but that's it. So there's a lot of the whole arena for whiskey making and drinking has completely changed. There are lots more younger people drinking whiskey. It's because I've had people come and sit here, and some young chap came in once and went, you were going to make me drink whiskey, you're going to make me like whiskey. I hate it, but I'm not leaving here until I like whiskey. So I was like, oh, okay. So it's on people's radar. It's still a discerning person's drink, I would say.
My favourite quote about whiskey was from Carl's dad once when we were like 18, I think. We were watching like the football in a pub, and Carl's brother, I always kind of liked whiskey anyway, but Carl's brother, we had whiskies. His dad was like, let's just have a round of whiskies and then we'll get off. So we got a round of whiskies. I can't remember what it was, probably Jameson or something, the average stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, this is nice. And his brother was like, oh, that is just terrible. And he said, it's all right, son. He said, you haven't lived enough to like whiskey. One day you'll like whiskey.
Interesting.
But I think it's the pain. You need a little bit of pain in your life to get the whiskey.
It's like olives. No one likes olives.
No,
that's true.
But then they become kind of like an adult thing, so therefore you become more curious. I think whiskey is like that, and it is generational as well. We see a lot of people coming in with they have lovely stories of their dads or mums,
my granddads,
and drinking whiskey. It's usually by a fire, and they have these lovely memories, so they kind of want to carry on that tradition. And there are some whiskey brands who are very, very cleverly kind of tap into that sort of generational opportunities, let's say. So you have people who come in and they're like, I only drink whatever it is because my dad drank it, my nan drank it, I'm going to drink it. And I think whiskey, a lot of whiskey brands really tap into that as well.
I want to know why you hear a lot about Irish whiskey, way more you hear about Scottish whiskey, but you don't hear too much about English whiskey. How come that is? And is English whiskey not as good, or?
So quite simply,
am I going to get in trouble with that question?
No, not at all. No, I just know it's funny. No, I don't talk about English whiskey. So English whiskey just doesn't have a history. English whiskey is a very new category.
So it hasn't got the story.
I'll backtrack on that, because there were distilleries years ago. So Scotland has history dating back, and this is written history dating back to the late 1400s. Ireland has the same. Ireland has written history dating back to the early 1400s. And there are so many points in time where something kind of, hugely impactful has happened, and so whiskey is constantly talked about. And we simply don't have time to go through all of those, because it is that, and that's where a lot of my interest lies now, is the kind of the history of whiskey, the cultural side of things. England doesn't have that. We had distilleries, and this is where my only knowledge is that we had a number of distilleries in Liverpool, Bristol, and London. And I think there were about 4 or 5 documented distilleries. The last one closed its doors, I think, in 1904 or 1905, something like that. I'm pretty sure that there are no bottles of those whiskies from those distilleries left anywhere. There may well be. They may resurface somewhere in an auction or somewhere in a cupboards,
check
whatever.
Your sheds.
Check your sheds, folks. But from what I understand is that they were making those whiskies a lot to send to Scotland for blending. So we don't have the culture. We don't have those stories, those pivotal people. We were a country that drank gin and beer, but we do not have, I have to keep adding a caveat to my knowledge, because there are people, because it's so new that people are now researching properly. And I think there's one book, which I haven't read because I can't find it, about the history of whiskey in England. So there is a history there, but there's not a cultural sense, I think, either. So fast forward, so I think it was 1404, 1405, something like that. Fast forward to 2003, that's the first next time somebody made whiskey in England. And it was actually Cornish whiskey, a company called Hicks and Healy, who started making whiskey from a beer wash. So they worked with a brewery. So sadly, they never actually get counted as the first English distillery, because they weren't actually making their own wash. So it actually comes down to the English Whiskey Company, who are in Norfolk, and they're slated as the first English distillery, which they are.
I can't believe this is the early 2000s, though.
This is 2005.
Insane.
I think they set up 2005. I can't remember when their first whiskey went on the market, but they are kind of credited with the pushing forward of the English scene. They are a farm distillery, still going now, make excellent whiskey. And they do what a lot of it's all about farming and agriculture and surplus. And, you'd use your barley for making whiskey, that, barley from your own fields would then go to make the whiskey. So they have quite traditional methods around it. So they were the first distillery. And then it was the Cotswolds distillery who came online, let's say in 2014. They were a bit bigger, certainly not better, but I think they marketed more, let's say. And I remember everyone on sort of tenterhooks, because in England we follow the 3-year maturation rule. So, and I remember talking to Dan, who's a great founder, because I think he's probably one of the most interviewed whiskey people ever to exist. I think during lockdown he was doing like interviews every single day globally, and he raised money to start this quite large distillery in the Cotswolds, which has a lot of farms. And I'm sure this is correct, all the farms that they use their barley are on the Blenheim estate. So they were able to create a localized product than a lot of the big Scottish distilleries do, because there simply isn't enough barley in Scotland. Like, barley is a European thing, so a lot of it is brought in from elsewhere. But the Cotswolds retain 100% local barley, as do English Whiskey Company, of course. So it's actually easier for English companies to go down the whole local barley route, because we're just not as big. To give you an idea of size, so Cotswolds have just quadrupled their capacity, actually. So they're a real success story for England. So whiskey distilleries are judged on their alcohol output. So Cotswolds has 125,000 LPA, so litres per annum, and that's of your pure alcohol. And they just quadrupled to 500,000. So that is a big English whiskey distillery. Now that is a small Scottish distillery. So they talk of kind of, farm distilleries. There's a similar size one called Kilhoman on the Isle of Islay, and they're also 500 LPA, and they're counted as quite a small, nice little distillery on Ireland.
Wow,
so that's kind of, and England will build, but this is how new we are, that we're just not comparable to Scotland in our output. And actually, I should bring in Ireland, and similarly to Ireland, Bushmills is the oldest licensed distillery in the world, 1608. They have the outputs, obviously you've got Jameson, Bushmills, etc. So you've got, big ticket distilleries owned by very, very large companies. So Jameson, sadly, isn't owned by an Irish company anymore. It's owned by Pernod Ricard. So, and actually, Jameson in Dublin isn't the distillery anymore. So we have a lot of people come in and they say, "Oh, I've been to Jameson." I was like, "You probably haven't. You've probably been to you've probably been to the museum in Dublin, but actually Jameson is made in Middleton in Cork, where they also make Redbreast. They make the Spot range and a number of other whiskies. But it means Middleton is an enormous. I don't know what their LPA is actually, but it will be massive." So going back briefly to England, it's been really, really interesting. So since English Whiskey Company, since Cotswolds, we now have, I think in the next few years, we're going to have 50 English distilleries. And most of them are very small. There's a couple rumoured that will possibly push the 1 million mark. But that's to kind of give you an idea of how. So just going back to Scotland, one of the big grain distilleries, I think, has an output of something like, I did hear it was 200 million LPA, but I think it's actually 160 million LPA.
Wow.
So that will be owned by Diageo, fully on into Johnny Walker and other blends. So that's what we're dealing with. It's critical to Scotland. I mean, whiskey tourism brings in about 2 million people a year into Scotland. So there's just a lot more infrastructure and history, heritage. People come from all over the world to go to Scottish whiskey distilleries. I've been up on Islay and I've met people from Hawaii, for example, traveling to Islay, not traveling to London and Edinburgh, traveling to Islay, which is tiny.
Yeah, well, the Lagavulin distillery there, that's on my go-to list at some point. I've got to go there. It's quite hard to get to as well, isn't it?
It is hard to get to. I mean, I think you could fly to India or Dubai in the time that it would actually take you to get to Islay.
Wow.
Well, it's about if you cheat and get the plane, which is an experience in itself. So you can go up to Glasgow and then you've got a 25-minute flight. And I'm not a brilliant flyer, and it's one of those tiny planes with the propellers outside. So it's beautiful. If you like flying, fly. It's wonderful. But if you want to bring back whiskey, then take a van. But you have to go up to Glasgow and then up and down, because you've got all these locks, inconvenient locks in the way. And then take a 2-hour ferry.
Wow.
But it is stunning. You've got me on the subject of Islay now, or I think probably would have ended up talking about it anyway. But it's one of my favourite places. I've been very lucky to be able to go up a lot. And it's a strange place because it is so, the distilleries are so important. So
that's what I mean. In my head, if I went there, just everything's a distillery.
Everything is. I mean, it's one of the bigger islands. So there's a lot of golfing. A lot of people go there to play golf. Bird watching. It's really beautiful. There's some beautiful, very protected areas for bird watching. But it is mainly distilleries. So you get this beautiful, if you walk along to Lagavulin, for example, so you've got this lovely path that goes along the sea, and you'll have the beautiful sea. And if you go at sort of sunrise or sunset, it is absolutely one of the most stunning places you'll ever go to. But it's also, there are issues if you have anything like that. I mean, there are 10 big working distilleries. You've got Kalila there, which is I think it's 6 million LPA, so really big ticket distillery. So you've got all the infrastructure that is associated with. So they have to get the whiskey off the island. They have to get barley onto the island and all the visitors. You have Calmac, who is the ferry service, 3 or 4 services a day. So you've got massive amounts of infrastructure problems. You don't have buses on a Sunday, for example. Buses are there mainly for the school kids. So you can actually very easily get around on bus to most of the distilleries, not all of the distilleries. So you have to rely on taxi services. So it's really expensive. You can't just rock up to a restaurant and go, "Oh, table for 2, please," and they'll laugh at you, because you need to plan. If anyone sits here and talks to me about Islay, I'm like, right, plan at least 6 months in advance. Really kind of think about where you're going to stay. Because I've had people, they're like, "Oh, we're going to go to Islay next month." I'm like, "You booked?" Like, oh no, we're looking at it this weekend. I was like, just don't even bother.
Don't even dream.
I mean, I've tried to go. I really wanted to go up this year, and I wanted to do. So I haven't been up for a little while. I can't remember how long. I wanted to do like a week or something, and I could just for me, one person. I couldn't get a place so I could chop and change, but I couldn't get one, a nice-ish, place for me just for 7 days. I'd had to stay in a number of places. Wow. So that is the kind of reality of it. But it's a fascinating place.
It's insane that all the islands have a specific type of whiskey as well. I find that blows my mind.
There are a number of islands. There are more producing islands now. So the Outer Hebrides have just, so we've got one on the bar actually, the Hirak, which I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly. And that's been released quite recently. So you've got Jura, Arran, Skye, obviously, Orkney, Shetland, Outer Hebrides, all of those islands. So Islay is the only island that has more than 3 distilleries. So Skye is kind of following suit. So they have 2 mainland distilleries, and then there's a very small island off Skye called Raasay, and they have 1 distillery. But no other island has more than 3. And I think, to my understanding, is that you have to have at least 3 distilleries plus like a very distinct flavour, a distinct profile. So Islay is all about peat, even though the peat is different, it has different impacts distillery to distillery. No other island has the same amount of distilleries or a flavour profile that they could attribute. So the islands are actually counted as part of the Highland region of Scotland, the whiskey making. So you legally have 5 areas, but we always talk about the islands as well, because I think it's a strange thing to kind of lump in, Arran and Orkney, for example, but they're actually classed as the same producing area. That's just how whiskey works. Yeah. But I think going back to what we were saying earlier, like why do people like it? It's for reasons like this, because it is so protected. So you've got the Scotch Whisky Association, and they will, that's their job, is to protect Scottish whiskey as a product. And they, I think a couple of things happened recently. I think it was a Chicago paper. They proudly declared that they were making Scotch in Chicago. And the SW went, no, you're not. You're making a single malt, but you are not making Scotch. So they kind of, I don't know if there was a retraction or whatever, but there was a company recently it was a Canadian company, and they were making, obviously, Canadian whiskey. And the founder was a Scottish person or had a Scottish name. And obviously everybody had emigrated over to Canada many years ago. And they were putting out whiskey under this very, very Scottish sounding name. But they were told they had to change one of their bottlings, I think, because it sounded too Scottish. So they were saying that they were trying to thwart the public, let's say, into believing that they were actually selling Scotch because it has a stronger profile. And it did look, there were lots of like incredibly Gaelic sounding names of this particular whiskey brand. And it was really good whiskey. It was a real shame. And they've just rebranded and done something else.
Yeah.
So
you do tend to find the branding's quite, I mean, a lot of the English whiskies, the branding is changing. But traditionally, the branding's very similar on a lot of whiskey bars.
Yeah, and now it's a much more crowded market. So bottle sizes, we work with a lovely distillery up in near Derby called White Peaks, obviously Peak District. And they're an old wireworks. So their bottle, I'll show you before you go, the bottle looks like twisted wire. So people are going, you wouldn't have bothered with anything like that years ago, but it really, really stands out. So the labeling is very simple, but people are always like, oh, why have they done that? Well, that's really interesting. And there's a lovely story behind it, because these guys in the Cotswolds are our nearest distilleries. There are 2 Birmingham distilleries, actually, but neither of them are quite yet putting out liquid. But in the next year, there will be 2 Birmingham whiskies, which is brilliant. So you've got West Midlands Distillery and Spirit of Birmingham as well. So
I remember at the English Whiskey Festival this year, they were both there giving up what it might taste like the early doors.
Yeah, so I think was it Jordan? I can't remember which one. Oh, no, it was Tony Pancakes. So Tony Pancakes, we always talk about Tony Pancakes, actually, because he's a lovely chap. He's called Tony Pancakes because he also used to run a pancake company.
Oh, right.
So Platinum Pancakes.
Oh, yeah.
You might remember it from he would do the rounds at... So yeah, he's now just known as Tony Pancakes. So he, and then there's Jordan and Lorna as well. So there are 2 really, really interesting distilleries coming online for Birmingham, which I think would be very exciting, actually.
Yeah, that's
about
great.
Time. But the key thing with both of them is they're both waiting until it's ready. neither of them, because they have other businesses, that neither of them are in a rush to put them out. And actually, they were very sensible. They didn't go too big too soon, let's say. So they're going to make some really good stuff, and I've tasted both, and it is exceptionally good quality. They're both really into local grains and interesting yeasts and interesting casks. They're buying Staffordshire oak, so English oak hasn't been used in whiskey making before, and now there's a cooperage in Staffordshire. There's quite a lot of Staffordshire oak actually being used in whiskey maturation.
Yeah.
So
it's mad. English whiskey's really taken off. That English whiskey festival.
Yeah, it's great.
The last 2 years there's been people from everywhere. People are really travelling just to try all these whiskies now.
So the organizer Richard, he's become a very good friend of mine. Actually, he's actually moving up to Birmingham from London because he's technically not one of us yet, but he will be soon. Yeah, he will be soon. So his festival, it was really funny when he signed up for his festival. People were phoning me. They're like, "Amy, do you know that there's another whiskey festival coming to Birmingham?" And I get so many messages from good friends just going, "Amy, you need to be aware. I'm very sorry to break it to you." And it's like, guys, it's fine. It was really sweet. But no, he's doing a great job actually. And there is also, so I've mentioned the Scotch Whisky Association. There is a similar organisation that's been set up in the last year called the English Whisky Guild, who will serve to also protect English whisky as a product. So it is being taken, very seriously as something that could do well for England if Scotch is anything to go by, and people visiting distilleries as well.
You tell people you're going to an English whiskey festival, they're expecting like 4 stalls.
I know,
with some special homebrew type stuff, and it's heaving. I haven't even tried every single place, no doubt every single whiskey, because each place has got about 3 or 4 whiskies on as well.
I think at the moment it's about 12 English distilleries that actually has enough matured stock to actually put out on the market. It could be more, could be 15 now, but over the next year or so there's going to be the next sort of turnover of distilleries that will turn 3 or 4. I think actually both Spirit of Birmingham and West Midlands Distillery are waiting until theirs is a bit older, so that, as I said, they're not rushing, so it will be a slightly older whiskey when they do put it out. Are
there any like emerging kind of far out countries that you're quite impressed with that are doing good things?
I'm a real sucker for Scotch. I kind of like the heritage, the stories. That's really kind of my bag. I would say Scandinavian countries, actually, I find really interesting. I think the climate is similar to Scotch, but they seem to just... we had a bottling recently from the Helsinki Distilling Company, and when you look at them, they just look at the coolest ever, just a really kind of cool company. Finnish whiskey, Icelandic whiskey.
Where's Storning's? That Danish?
That's Denmark. Yeah, Storning's actually fantastic.
Yeah.
And they tend to they don't just go down the single malt route. They will tend to use a lot of rye, actually, sort of slightly different grain composition than Scotland. Scotch tends to be, having said that, though, there are Scottish ryes, but they tend to sort of, the marketable things it's the single malt.
Because I think we were talking about, they've got one that's like flavours of mezcal and chocolate involved.
Yeah, they've started using, they brought one in the other day, and actually, I'm not going to lie, I really like what they do, so I'm just going to caveat it with that. They matured it in something like a chili cask. No, Tabasco. They'd used it, but it was awful.
Okay.
Wow.
We all had it, and I don't know. I absolutely love what they do, but they just had an experiment. It was fun. It was just fun, and the guy,
too far.
Yeah, I was just like, absolutely not, no. But then they brought some exceptional other bottles in, and they do tend to use things like mezcal and tequilas. So I would say sort of Denmark, Sweden, interesting Scandi whiskey, I think would be where I kind of look. But places like Australia are doing, fantastic whiskies.
I've heard of that.
There's a distillery called Starwood, not Star Wars, Starwood. So they're interesting because they use lots of wine casks, obviously Australian wine. They're kind of making full use of having lots of vineyards on their doorsteps. There's lots and lots of beautiful red wine cask whiskies from Australia. But you name a country, they're producing. There's not a lot of coming out of, say, South America, actually. That's the only sort of big area that isn't really producing. But yeah, so you name a country and
Yeah,
anyone
what's that
can
one?
produce whiskey.
Kavalan. Where's that from?
That's Taiwan. So they're
Taiwan.
doing amazing things actually. So what you've got in hotter countries is that you've got a more of a sped up maturation. So you can have a whiskey that sort of acts older than it actually is. So obviously Scotch, everyone gets very caught up in the idea that older whiskey is better whiskey. And then you go to sort of very hot countries, like India's doing some fantastic whiskies, actually really fantastic. We work with a company called Paul John, and they're going. So when you have a hotter climate, the evaporation is sped up. Your angel share, so the angel share is the evaporation each year. You're losing more of your liquid every year. But it's like the interaction with the wood is sped up because of the heat. So you can have, so we have one Paul John, their Oloroso cask, which is similar actually to Kavalan. Both massive, if you like your sherry whiskies, something like that from a hotter country using a really good sherry cask is fantastic.
Does that mean they don't necessarily have to wait the 3 years as well?
They still have to wait 3 years.
Right.
So that is pretty standard, apart from Australia, where they have a 2-year maturation, actually. And then it depends what you're making in America in terms of your how long you have to mature things. So this is like another geek level of how long you need to mature it. But it doesn't. So you get a lot of like younger bourbons or younger whiskies from hotter countries, and you can't say, oh well, I only drink aged Scotch, as a lot of people do. So you would have Kavalan, I think, started. I think a lot of those can be sort of 5, 6, and they're great. They're great whiskies. You can't say, well, it's only 5 years old, so therefore I'm not going to drink it. It is not comparable to a 5-year-old Scotch because the climate is so different. It's much more diverse. So you've got this completely different interaction with the wood, and that matters. And then add in the sherry, or the ex-sherry cask or the ex-port cask. So you're going to get a lot of flavour. So it's just different. I would say they're kind of cousins rather than siblings, let's say.
Can you trace it back to one country that introduced whiskey to the whole world, or have countries naturally found it their own way?
What a question.
You cause a war on it.
Yeah. So the history of whiskey is fantastic. It diverges a lot with just the history of distilling, the history of making alcohol. If we're going to put a pin on it, you track it back to Ireland, and there's a lot of history around why, and that is the first written reference in the very early 1400s where somebody died because they drank so much. So I love the fact that is the first reference, but that's the first written reference. It wasn't referenced again until late 1400s, when much more appropriate Scottish text said somebody was buying a certain amount of malt for the king to make aquavitae. So everything kind of charts back to aquavitae, so the idea of what aquavitae was. But lots of countries were doing things. What I have found is that there's always a drunk monk story. So, and you can track the movement of knowledge of distillation via traveling monks, really via I guess missionaries and what have you. And it's likely that the knowledge came up through Europe into Ireland and then spread to Scotland. But then if you have an Irish person and a Scottish person around the table, then that's going to be heavily disputed.
Yeah.
Whiskey as the product, the lovely product that we have in front of us, the sophisticated product, wouldn't have been that. It's probably maturation probably came as an accident because of storage. People were just storing their spirits. It would have started off as any old stuff just thrown in. So it's kind of it's a difficult question. You can't really answer it in 100%. This is what this person was, knocking about in their shed and created whiskey and matured it for 3 years. The 3-year rule is fascinating actually, because that came from somebody in the 30s. We had a teetotal chancellor, and they actually wanted to eradicate whiskey. There was a new act that came in. I think it was called the Immature Spirits Act, and that was, they didn't want anyone drinking. So he thought that if he put this act where you have to mature it, then no one would wait. But actually what it did was kind of solidify whiskey as a quality product. So there are lots of things that have happened over the course of the story of whiskey that have changed it into the sophisticated product that we have. But the history of alcohol is something else, and something really just absolutely fascinating. I think it is. Where the stills come from, where even the terminology comes from.
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole kind of different podcast. We could go like massive deep.
Do a series on that, I think.
Oh yeah, you should do. It's really
definitely.
interesting, and just the kind of the history of it. You can't just sort of look at whiskey as in the history of alcohol. You have to kind of look at a much broader who's making what. There's so much. There was something in France. The French are great drinkers of whiskey, and I think they're still the country that buys the most single malt. And that stems back from, you might have heard, if you drink your wine, there was a mite that wiped out lots of vineyards, or pretty much every single vineyard in Europe. And so the French had no brandy. So they turned to the next brown spirit, and that would have created so much more demand for it. So all these like really interesting little points in history that collectively have sort of risen whiskey into the I guess it's a global phenomenon, really. I could be here all night, I tell you.
I could sit here all night as well.
When people come to the bar, and people come from wherever, as I said, the people from Scotland who came to learn about whiskey. It's one of my prouder moments. And so everyone has a little tidbit of information, and collectively, I feel like we're the sort of custodians almost of all these stories.
I think this answers the question why whiskey is so special compared to everything else. Because the amount of depth of stuff you've gone into, I don't think you can do it on many other things.
No, I think it depends. I think a lot of people would say that about cognac, for example, wine. But having done a bit of work in English wine, which I found really fascinating, but not as fascinating as whiskey. There's something about the kind of evolution, how it's just, I guess, taken countries by storm. The investment side, we were talking about that earlier, the investment side, how expensive certain whiskies are.
Well, there are
these
people
days.
that will buy a whiskey and hoping it's going to go up in value and just hold on to it.
Yeah. I mean, I know people, the question that I have been asked more times than I care to remember is, I want to start investing in whiskey. What should I do? And I can never, obviously I'd never give investment advice because I don't want someone tapping on my door in 20 years from time going, you've ruined my life.
Yeah.
So, because it is a very delicate thing, and the tide is slightly turning at the moment. And there have been, sadly, a lot of, let's just say, corrupt companies in the cask. There's some very good companies in the cask investment industry, but some pretty awful ones. So people have kind of got onto it as a bit of a quick win kind of thing. And casks have been sold for way more than they should have been. So I think a lot of people have lost out. And I think a lot of people who've been advertised on Facebook, these they use this one example, and it's a cask of Macallan, and it was bought, and it's a real example, and the numbers were real. And I think it was something, they bought it in the 80s for something like £5,000, and they sold it for something like £1 million a couple of years ago. So that did happen. It is not going to happen again.
No.
Unless they find, obviously, somebody else who's got a cask of Macallan from the 80s. But they were using this as this is what you're, almost not explicitly saying it, but kind of saying, look at what could happen to you. So everyone was, kind of jumping on the bandwagon. So I know lots of people who've bought casks, and they might be fine. I don't know. I'm not even going to comment on it because but I know people who have, and it might be fine, might be, do well in a good few years, but.
So people who have listened to this and really got into it, I've found it fascinating. I know he loves all of this.
I love whiskey anyway. Yeah, I'm sold.
A good thing for them to do would be to come down here and do one of the whiskey tasting. There's a nice tasting room over there. I'll put a photo up on the gram and stuff. We kind of, our team here, we do make sure we go up to lots of distilleries, which obviously is a lovely thing to do. And I'm not going to be sad about that. But it does mean that our knowledge, we make sure that our knowledge is always good. We're well connected in the industry, and we do genuinely have people coming in from all over. We have people coming up from London because they haven't been able to get a similar experience in London, which we're all okay, which is lovely. So we are, although we are a bar, we are a tasting. We call ourselves a whiskey tasting experience company, so bar and tasting experiences, and that is the catalyst for a lot of people to come here. So anyone can just rock up to the bar within opening times, ideally. Probably won't let you in, but you never know. When do you? Is it Wednesday?
We're Wednesday, Saturday at the moment. Yeah, so we're normally pretty busy on a Saturday. We do our lots of events. We still bring brands in, so more or less every Friday you'll have a brand in the back talking about their own whiskies. So you can buy tickets to that, or you can do one of our tastings, which will be with myself, or my whiskey specialist Renata, or one of the specialists who we have a few other people kind of who will come and help us out when we're busy as well, other whiskey specialists. So the experiences, I think, are what set us apart from I don't want to say, just being a bar, because that is also what we are. But everything is about teaching people how to drink whiskey. The sessions they're funny, I think. People come out and they always say what an amazing experience they have, because I think people come in thinking whiskey is going to be this incredibly quite dry, slightly boring subject, and it's not. It's so rich and diverse. Yeah, we try and sort of educate, and obviously everything is about community, so people can just sort of prop up the bar. So I think people, when they come here, they're pleasantly surprised that we're actually very informal. You don't have to have any knowledge. We have, I'll show you our whiskey converts board, which people we put it up as a bit of a joke years ago. People absolutely love it. So we always
took a photo already.
taking pictures of the converts board. So because that is a real thing. People come in. We get a lot of people. They come in with their partner and they're like, "Oh no, I won't even bother. I'm not going to try." And we're like, "I'm going to make you." And sometimes it works. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But we kind of think there's a whiskey for everyone. But I think a lot of people associate whiskies with big peaty whiskey, and there can be like a plethora of styles. You can have very light, very easy drinking whiskey, right up to something that will put hairs on your chest.
Yeah. So there is a whiskey for everyone.
Yeah, I think maybe
Nearly.
almost. I've definitely had people in here who are just like, you just got no chance, and they're fine. They can still come in because we don't just do whiskey. We do some rums now. So rum is becoming very popular. And then if you don't want to do any of that, then you can just sit and have a cocktail at the bar or a glass of wine. So
Well, the whiskey tastings are an incredible value for money as well. I've been on
They
whiskey
are.
tastings. The whole cost of that whiskey tasting, if you're in a fancy restaurant
Yeah.
and you look at the whiskey menu list at the end, it would cost you that just for one
yeah.
serving of that whiskey.
Yeah, so they are good value, and we have endless discussions about our price points. So our starting price point for our World of Whiskey, which is our kind of beginners, most accessible, let's say, is 30 quid. And the reason is that we want people to come in and have a really nice time, and I think that just opens it out. So most of the time, our World of Whiskey sessions are sold out. So we do 4 a week, and I just think having a really good accessible entry point is really important to whiskey, because I think if you're a beer drinker or a wine drinker, when you look at prices of whiskey, I think you can be immediately put off. And I think, we've had some people in and they just, you have, obviously in this country, it's 25 mil. You can get a pint of beer for the price of a fairly average whiskey, actually. So you've got a pint, which is 500 mil, and then a whiskey at 25 mil. I think when people look at it and I could nurse a pint for however long, or have a 25 mil whiskey, So I think sometimes the pricing point can be quite difficult for people. So that's why with the tastings, we want a decent, accessible entry point to kind of get them warmed up, let's say.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that don't drink whiskey or anything like that often. They see that much liquid.
Yeah,
they
and
instantly assume it's a shot.
Yeah.
I've been people around my house and I've given them a nice whiskey, a really nice whiskey, and they've just gone, "Oh, cheers." Gone. I've gone,
Yeah.
"Whoa," and then they've started having a coffee fit because it was like an Arberg or something like this. I'm like, you can't just neck that.
We do lots of stag do's, actually, and they're always very well behaved. We very rarely have any bother. But sometimes you have to actually say, just wait for a second. We'll talk through it. And then if they want to shot it after that, if they want to go and grab a cola from the bar or put ice in it, or, we're not, bothered at all. We don't.
I think that's
dictate.
what people might be worried about, that there's lots of rules involved. You're quite open with that.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, people, they're like, "Oh, can I just have a Jameson and Coke?" Or ginger, Jameson and ginger, thinking that we're going to laugh at them and send them packing. And it's like, yeah, sure. If people come in and they play their funny jokes on us and say, "Oh, can we have a whiskey and cola?" thinking that we're just going to go, "No, we just don't serve it." Like, yeah, sure. Which one would you like? And they get a bit kind of, "Oh, right." But, we have cocktails, loads of cocktails. So loads of really classic cocktails are made with whiskey. So I don't see the difference in adding some water to or a cola or a nice ginger ale. Like our staff drinks in the summer, actually just all the time. It's, like a Jameson and ginger in a lovely, tall glass with some lime, or not lime, some mint, or
I've got to admit, Jameson gin's one of my favourite all-time
lovely.
drinks.
But
It's
people
so
get
nice.
very caught up, and if you sort of flip it on its head a bit and think, right, there's loads of whiskey. We could swim in whiskey if we wanted to. The brands want you to drink their whiskey. They want you to drink it with ice. They want you to drink it with cola. They do not mind how you drink it, as long as that you're drinking it. So if you think about, let's just say, when you think of a whiskey drinker, an older whiskey drinker, let's say, this is going to sound very disrespectful, a lot of those people won't be here in the next 10, 20 years. They need a new legion of fans that love their brands, and they know that people drink differently these days. You can't have maybe the purest attitudes of, a few years ago, whatever, are fine, but they want people to buy their whiskey. And there's a lot of whiskey being made. We were talking earlier about Japan and how they have lovely long drinks. They have a lot of highballs. And that's really kind of, there's part of their culture of drinking over there. Lots of ice, a beautiful ice culture over in Japan. I just don't see the difference. I would normally drink whiskey. I'll try it neat because I want to taste it. And I will most of the time now put water in it. So water will just soften it down a bit. And there's a lot of other flavors that are kind of lurking, let's just say under the alcohol, that will be brought up. And if it's too harsh, like why carry on with something that you're not enjoying when you could just smooth it down a little bit and maybe enjoy it a bit more? In a very practical way, we don't have a dress code apart from fancy dress. We don't do that. And that comes from a stag do that wore an inflatable flamingo around their waist. So after that, we were like, no. I made him deflate it in front of everyone. So yeah, we're really informal. You can wear trainers. We're not a posh place. We want to be informal. As I think whiskey, at the end of the day, whiskey is a drink. It should be drunk. It should be shared. It should be chatted about. It is interesting, but the rules are nonsense, in my humble opinion.
Awesome. We've done like over an hour now. It's been fantastic. I've loved it.
Feels like 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's gone so fast.
It's the problem with whiskies. You open one door of conversation.
Yeah,
This is
there's a lot of rabbit holes.
It's really hard to do tastings. But yeah, it's kind of changed my life massively from if I think about, where I was all those years ago before this. This is completely different. And the fact that it added something to Birmingham, Birmingham's brilliant. I mean, it always was a brilliant city, but
it wasn't always brilliant. it wasn't. I was going to say, at the beginning when you said about the whiskey companies were saying it's not even third on our radar or something like that.
Yeah.
And there will be people who were upset about that. And even a little bit of me went, them bastards. But then you know what? They're not lying.
They would literally say to me.
But it was true back then. Before 2012, maybe 2011, Birmingham wasn't that good.
No,
it just wasn't. So
no, I think that's it's a universal truth, and I think that's why a lot of people did something at the same time. So I was obviously thinking about stuff. I remember speaking with Jack Brabham actually very, very early on. He was just starting to kind of think, or he'd just done a few events or whatever, and I just started to do this and there was just other people.
Tom Cullen just started doing iTunes.
Tom
Joe just started Independent Birmingham.
Yeah, so in fact, we all have a really similar kind of legacy in terms
Carl
of time.
at the church just down the road. Yeah,
well, he
cool
was
stuff just happening.
So if we do a food event, actually, he caters for our food event.
So, he does.
Yeah, but he was. I remember talking to him early doors as well. So all these people kind of, I think we were like collectively annoyed, and collectively annoyed enough to do something about it and get off our collective backsides and actually change something. So I think we were all having the same message, and that was everyone just being really sick of being told that Birmingham was crap.
And we're eternally grateful to all of those people that we just mentioned, because without all of that, we wouldn't be able to do a podcast about how fantastic the Birmingham hospitality scene is.
Yeah, and that's really supportive. So when the fact that we have an outlet to actually talk about our stories, because it's quite, we're also busy just doing stuff and like getting on and bringing, and we all collectively bring people to the city that wouldn't have necessarily come here before. So we should all be very grateful to each other, I think.
Yeah, we are definitely. Yeah. So we finished with Carl just doing some lighthearted, nothing to do. Well, I'm pretty sure there probably will be one
whiskey-related question at least.
But it's just a nice way to finish the podcast and people to get to know you better.
So, what's your favourite TV show?
I'm a real geek. Star Trek.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. What's your favourite movie?
This is like when people ask me my favourite whiskey, because I can never answer it.
Well, you better think of one for that one.
Again, I'm a real geek, so something like Lord of the Rings.
Do you have a favourite band or artist that you like?
Don't anymore. I was kind of a child of I'd say 90s grunge Seattle era. So
nice.
I guess 90s stuff.
Stone Temple Pilot.
Yeah,
Nirvana,
just Nirvana and that's a bit. So Red Hot Chili Peppers. I remember
Silverchair.
getting my tape of Red Hot Chili Peppers when I was 16 and listening to it for hours.
What's your favourite whiskey?
What's your favourite whiskey? I knew it.
Okay, what's your favourite whiskey right now?
So I'm going to answer this in a different way. So it's people who I enjoy working with. So these guys I always talk about, these guys at White Peak. So I do a lot of work with them, but I would say, and I really like what they're doing. I like their story. I like their whiskey. I tend to go for really peated whiskies as well. So this particular White Peak isn't particularly peated, but I would normally go for I think Kalila actually is probably one of my favourite distilleries because I think their whiskey works really well in lots of different types of cask. It's quite hard to get a bad Kalila.
And what's your favourite food destination in the whole world? Or drink destination? You can have a drink one there.
I really, really enjoyed going to Porto. I've been to Porto quite a few times.
Yeah.
And I think if I go on holiday, it's normally around wine or some kind of structure of alcohol, which I don't know what that says about me. So I do go up to Scotland a lot. I love Edinburgh, and Glasgow, Islay. But I would say a sort of food destination, I'd say Porto, definitely.
Nice.
Cool, that's us.
We're all good.
Yeah.
Thanks
again
very
for
much.
That's
having
right.
us.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome. So that ends our penultimate episode.
There's only one left now after this.
Anyone left, mate? I cannot believe it.
Jesus.
It's hard to believe that a year's work has got us to here.
I know, it's bad, ain't it?
Yeah. Really excited for that one. Massive thank you to Amy, Grind and Glass, just sharing her knowledge and talking so passionately about a really complex subject.
Yeah, she's really cool as well. Good to just hang around with and chat anyway.
Yeah. Appreciate her doing this. Thanks to both our sponsors, Burning Barn Rum, Easy Food, and thanks to you for watching and listening. We really appreciate every single one of you. Please like, subscribe, share wherever you can. It means so much. So see you next week for our last episode for a while. Lewis Walker. We're going out with a bang. Lewis Walker. Everyone knows Lewis Walker in the industry.
Yeah,
UCB legend.
He was one of the first names on the list as well.
It's no coincidence that Birmingham has such a strong food scene and a brilliant first-class food college. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
So tune in next week for that. Can't wait to see you all again.